Hey everyone, welcome back to FPL Fran. Today's video is going to be my Game Week 23 transfer plans. We'll be looking at how I'm planning to navigate my transfers a little bit later in the video, 23 plus, with the sort of hub client. I think it's very useful to mention that this game week is one where it makes a lot of sense to just jump onto the Liverpool player of your preference, so long as you think that their minutes are reasonably guaranteed for Game Week 24. The main reason I say this is because Ipswich at home, to be honest, is the best game for the foreseeable for Liverpool. So by jumping on now, you are guaranteeing that sort of expected value here. And then you're also taking the chance, I suppose, that that player will also deliver in the double, which they should. The reason why I don't really love going on to an attacker now, generally speaking, is because, yes, you might be able to, after the Champions League match versus Lille, infer who's going to start in that match and get the Ipswich at home value. Jota being out, although I'm not sure, of course, whether he's going to be out for an extended amount of time or whether he's just, been out of training, for example, for a week, is not something that you can legislate for at around Game Week 24 if it seems like we don't get a proper timeline from slot and it seems like a short-term injury. Because if you actually look at when the dates fall for the double, so for Game Week 23, for example, this is quite a clean game for Liverpool, no issues there. But I think more importantly, when you look at the time lag between Bournemouth versus Liverpool first game versus Everton versus Liverpool, not only am I first saying that the Bournemouth game is more important, and there's actually probably going to be two matches and cup matches that are still quite relevant for Liverpool here. Not really the Champions League match, but they do play another Carabao Cup leg, and that's going to be very significant. And that comes right before Everton versus Liverpool. So I do think that Liverpool, you could see minutes rotated for any of the attackers. You can make the argument now that, let's say, Gakpo and Lucias are first choice, right, if Jota's out. But who is to say that Jota can't come back around this time? Who's to say that Nunez isn't playing well enough, because he's already shown something, right? Some signs of life within the previous match versus Brentford that now call into question the minutes of all the players. In theory, yes, you could see reiterations of Gakpo playing 89 minutes versus Brentford, but you can't say that if, let's say, Luis Diaz is having a decent game, where if Gakpo is to come on and he's one of the more proactive offensive subs, or Chiesa somehow is able to play more than 5 minutes at a time in a Premier League match, then there could also be situations where Gakpo can be subbed out. And that's why I'm not sure if I'm totally in love with the mobility, I suppose, of the attacking move. Not to mention that you probably also have to transfer that attacker out. In my circumstances, I think when I'm moving towards a defender or goalkeeper, it's more likely that I'm going to play those players more consistently after the double. So the long-term value of going for a Liverpool player is not just, the short-term value of 23 and 24, but more so what it means to be playing a Liverpool defender very consistently. And I still hold Liverpool in extremely high regard as a defense. Yes, they got a clean sheet recently, but if you look at most of the recent matches, the expected goals conceded has been very, very low. And that's a promising sign for a team that we want to be generally invested into, even if they blank Game Week in 29. So those are my thoughts in terms of Liverpool. As far as my game week here in Game Week 22, I'm having a pretty okay game week. I have to say I completely did not have the temerity to stick with that Palmer captain. And so, yeah, I backed out into a Salah captain, mostly because I thought Salah was actually a very, very good fixture play here, right? Salah is not someone who you feel bad playing versus Brentford away. Brentford still gave plenty of chances. We've seen that Liverpool recently have insane shot dominance. And I actually wanted to share something from Ted Knutson, formerly from StatsBomb. I mean, he shared an insane graphic showing Liverpool's gradual sort of dominance over the course of the season, and it's really impressive how they've transformed into both an extremely good defensive team, which is sort of what we saw the improvement was at the start of the season, where we were saying maybe they're actually a little bit less offensive compared to Klopp, to now actually maintaining levels of offense potentially equal or better, and now also just being an outright better defense, which they've been able to maintain for the course of the season. So Liverpool, they're the best team in the league by quite a distance, and I think the league table reflects that. Outside of Liverpool, though, there's not too much interest in for me. I think City had a great game versus Ipswich, but it was Ipswich. Would have been nice to see Ipswich away, I suppose, look so easy, I suppose, when I had Palmer captain, but that's just total BS. The key point I'd say within City is, yes, they look good, and they've had some good recent performances, but then you also have to remind yourself that, first of all, it's hard to get into the City picks now, because I think Haaland is priced in such a way where you really have to be captaining him every week to actually consider owning him. And then for Foden, I think he's probably the only viable pick right now, because we can't necessarily say that KDB is impervious to rotation around UCL, where they actually need to take quite a bit of priority in their sort of Champions League ranking, and more minutes for KDB there will probably mean less minutes for him in the league because of the demands at his age. On top of that, the defense still looks, for the most part, awful. Ipswich have not really put any sort of, again, I guess, confrontation against like the two previous matches, right? In Brighton, who have actually been playing quite well, I would say. Brighton seem like they're on the up, and I don't think it's just purely Welbeck coming back in. I think there's some solidity there, at least at the back for Brighton. But on top of that, we can also say that they put up pretty much nothing versus City. And so when I'm looking at this Ipswich match now, that's why it feels so comfortable being able to consider a plan towards moving towards triple Liverpool and having double Liverpool defense for this game. But on City, I think also we should just not overreact too much. Foden for me is the only pick. Their fixtures are really poor. The landscape going forwards probably doesn't mean that we touch City players up until maybe Game Week 29. Or you can go a little bit earlier, but you just have to have a look at the fixture run, and it's just not great. Whereas with Newcastle, there's still two good games, I would say, within the distance, and then you can consider selling their players a little bit after, like 25 plus. And unfortunately, a lot of the sells for, let's say, players like, I don't know, an Isak or a Hall even, they just aren't really there. There's not players that you feel like you're rushing to move towards in FPL. So I feel like we've reached a bit of a stalemate in this game where you actually have the time to actually move into these Everton players in the double, even though you might think that you don't rate Everton whatsoever as a team. But at least, hey, they've actually put in a good performance once, and maybe Moya's ball is real. Even the expected goals numbers for the last two games were actually pretty healthy, both in the attacking and defending point of view, in terms of where you want Everton to be as a team, as in not just a team that can only, I suppose, keep 0-0s and clean sheets that way, but actually be able to put some level of offense and pressure against other teams, right? So that's a benefit. Other than that, I'd say right now we're at a phase where a lot of the premiums in the game are players you don't have to sell up until Game Week 29, and that kind of locks things in place. And I'm talking about Trent as well. What you can be constantly moving is these midfielders, like the Odegaard Bruno types, and even the players who are a lot cheaper. There's a lot of scope to move these players, particularly to Bournemouth players. And when I look at my team, am I really stressing the need for a transfer? Not necessarily. I mean, Odegaard and Bruno for me are very interesting players because clearly the value to them is through set pieces, is through sometimes the occasional foray into open play chances, which, you know, Odegaard has actually had some good chances. If I remember Ipswich at home and Tottenham at home, those were the key games where really he should have had opportunities, I'd say, to score a goal quite easily. Bruno has been actually scoring goals in open play, so very different to Odegaard, who's just been really poor at finishing the season and has been a little bit boring to bounce in open play. But these are penalty takers for good functioning teams, not necessarily in the case of Man United, of course, but I'd say Man United at least are able to put in a level of offense that you can say, okay, owning a penalty taker from that team is good value. And we've just seen Kluivert as well do well in open play after actually going really cold for the season in terms of finishing. And it just shows you that I think being invested into these sorts of players for a mix of different reasons, like penalties plus corners plus set pieces plus free kicks plus other things like, you know, general chance creation within the game. So players like Bruno and Odegaard, as you can see in recent weeks, as soon as they get, let's say, one return or even no returns, they're still quite likely in most cases to actually get quite deep into the bonus. And that helps in niche circumstances where they're not having an extremely explosive game, which I don't think is their game, either of their game. So that's something to mention. João Pedro continues to look very, very dull in open play, but I still think he's a very strong pick because Brighton still look like they're functioning well. When I'm watching the games, is he still getting decent chances in terms of if I think certain actions can fall differently and the positions that he's taking up to maybe, you know, to be receptive, for example, towards a cutback, or even let's say, you know, when you're looking at the set piece today where he got a disallowed goal, which I think, you know, was fairly disallowed. Do I think João Pedro, generally speaking, is occupying, I suppose, the spaces that I'd like a player to have, considering that the Brighton fixture run is easing up? I think, yeah, that's true. And at the end of the day, he's a penalty taker as well. So for me, I have full faith, I guess, in keeping João Pedro, especially at that sort of price point. And Rodgers is someone who looks great. Expectedly did bench him. I did bench actually Castagna and Munoz, so I'm sure a lot of people will have a lot to say about me playing Gabriel, but I have no qualms around having a strong defense and having a strong bench. At the end of the day, I'm still consistently being able to get some green arrows. Yes, I'm not necessarily maximizing by guessing correctly on who in my team is going to blank, who in my team isn't going to blank, but I'm still trying to, in theory, maximize around the fixtures each week and put out a strong team. And I think I've been able to do that because of the ridiculous team value that I have, but also that I generally believe and in maximizing around fixtures, and sometimes it comes out poorly like this with the defense. But in I would say, if I was to play, let's say, the rest of my FPL career out, playing towards fixtures, playing towards modeled projections is probably a good health and safe way to play the game, and I'll subscribe to that until, I guess, my last FPL day. But as far as Palmer and Salah cap, I did talk about that earlier. The main reason why I actually didn't go for this move, and who knows, Palmer might not play, I might get Castagna off the bench, or Palmer might play and he might make me look very stupid. But I was ultimately a little bit concerned with how, with Enzo, I would say, being quite a forthright manager, him mentioning the doubts probably meant that there's definitely some uncertainty around, let's say, the squad that Chelsea can put out. And of course, if you have, no Enzo, no Lavia, that does weaken the Chelsea team. Same with no Colwill, right? These are all significant players to the team right now. And when for example, we were looking at someone like Enzo a few weeks ago, mentioning that no Lavia, Enzo is probably worse than, with Lavia, Enzo, I think the same applies very much to Palmer, and some of those are the key players within the team. It's obviously still Wolves at home, and we know plenty of teams have been able to feast. But I think ultimately Salah not doing particularly well within the Brentford game is just a good representation, I suppose, of you can't always get things right when it comes to maximizing on fixtures. I think no one would have said the same thing with Isak having still on paper a good game, because it's just a home game with Bournemouth. And last week we saw Chelsea completely dominate Bournemouth in the first half, but instead what we saw at St. James Park was a complete domination of Newcastle through Bournemouth. So these things happen. You can't predict things and you can't legislate for things. I think it's just fine to make sure that you have a strong, consistent team that you can see and envision will be able to navigate the landscape week to week quite well. And I think that's very much what I have. Wood, credits to him. He's been, I don't know, showing generational finishing. There's nothing else really to say about Wood. I think the assist was obviously very fluky, but he is just peaking really in his career. And that happens, right? Welbeck technically was peaking at the start of the season. He's already breached almost his career goal tally in previous seasons. Wood has very much surpassed what anyone would have projected for him at the start of the season. And I think the argument always goes back to, is he able to maintain this ridiculous rate, and is he fixture proof? And I think I would say probably he's able to maintain, I guess, some level of this absurd finishing. But going back to the point in terms of, do I think he's going to be fixture proof? I wouldn't say so. No, I still think that Wood is someone that when I look at these fixtures here in the horizon, Bournemouth away, Brighton at home, Fulham away, Newcastle away, Arsenal. I mean, really up until that City game at 28, can you really say that the fixtures are going to be any good for Wood? So I do think this is the time to sell Wood. I've farmed, I think, 4 price rises from him. I doubt that I'll be able to farm the full 6, but it's been a pleasurable experience for Wood, including, I guess, benching his great goal versus Liverpool, where I looked stupid for it, but hey, why not? And congratulations to him for a great season. So that's kind of where I'm at right now. Green Arrow, hopefully. I don't see myself jumping into the top 50k this week, but next week I'm still happy with my team. If I look at my team now in Gameweek 23, I've kind of already set up my team for what happens if I roll. And the big part of the transfer plans video for this week is what happens if I roll versus what happens if I actually make some transfers to try and maximize in terms of short-term gain. So one thing I'll say about Flecken is this is actually not a bad fixture for Flecken, right? Crystal Palace are one of the worst offenses. If you're, let's say, putting teams into a top or bottom half, I mean, they're definitely a bottom half offense, and that's not too bad for Flecken, but it is an away game, so it's not incredible. In terms of defense, though, Gabriel seems to be without Saliba. I think the news on Saliba is now that he's without, or he's probably going to miss out for 2 weeks, which makes sense. It lines up with a very sort of minor hamstring injury. Maybe we see Saliba back versus Man City. Alternatively, we see him back versus Leicester if he gets a little bit more time off. And so I still think that Gabriel is a very easy play this week. I do have Munoz on the bench, which is a little bit regrettable, because ultimately it's me basically saying that I'd prefer Gabriel versus Wolves away versus Munoz. Hall, I'd like to play versus Southampton. Southampton are actually shown pretty competent levels of attack, but there's also games I'll remind where, if you look at the Brentford game, for example, where they've still looked really, really poor, and still for the most part, I think not overly threatening as a team, despite actually scoring 2 versus Nottingham Forest, which is very impressive. Trent, just an easy play. In the midfield, I mean, Palmer, I've seen some people suggest that they're going to bench Palmer. I probably will play Palmer because I do think he's outright just a ridiculous player, and City still, from the defense point of view, have not shown enough signs for me to say that they've completely turned a corner. Yes, the Mateus Nunes experiment is actually working, I would say, in terms of how it's facilitating a lot of their offensive play. Luke actually made a really good sort of point around how arguably this use of Nunes which is different, right, to how Rico tends to operate and play, has arguably enabled Foden within recent Man City games. But I'd also say that these recent games have been quite nice Man City games, right? They're playing versus weaker teams, and so yes, of course, Foden's showing absolutely exceptional form, but we can't forget that City will have some tough fixtures on the horizon, and I would be very impressed if City were able to get, I guess, or to run at that sort of historic season-winning rate that they would do over these runs of games, considering the level of play that they've shown this season, despite the sort of new innovations that Pep has brought about with the team. Odegaard, I'll play just because it's Wolves. Bruno's probably one of those questions where, you know, arguably he could also be one of those players that I'd bench Wood for, or João Pedro. And with the João Pedro case, I think the slight tilt under Moyes to being, you know, a little bit more capable on both sides of the pitch, or a little bit more flexible in terms of, you know, being a weaker defense, but then actually trading that off for offense so that you can actually score some goals in the Premier League, probably means that I'm still inclined to play João Pedro for a home game. I think also ultimately Bournemouth away are such a tough matchup. We've seen a lot of tough top teams go there and struggle, and I really think that Bournemouth can do that to Nottingham Forest as well. So I will be planning to bench Wood, and ultimately there's an argument for risk as well, where Wood is so highly owned. If I bench him again and I put myself in another position to look stupid, just like when he scored versus Liverpool, then why not? I could maybe benefit if he blanks in a tough game. And so that's probably where I'm inclined to do. And Isak, an easy vice captain for this week, whereas Salah has just the prime fixture in the league overall. Maybe let me know what your thoughts are in terms of Gabriel versus Munoz, or arguably if you want me to play Hall over Munoz as well. I will be actually very curious to see how the markets react to Arsenal and their team strength, right? Because we did see, I would say, the goals that they conceded versus Aston Villa. I'm sure someone can make the argument that if Saliba was within the team, that you don't expect those goals to be conceded. And I think that's fair enough. If you want to raise that argument, it might even impact how I want to play Gabriel this week. So who knows? I think Munoz, Brentford home just looks like such a good game. I always love home games in FPL, so benching a good home game doesn't feel particularly good. I'd also say that Crystal Palace haven't looked particularly good in terms of defense outside of the most recent Leicester match, right? So or not the Leicester match, but rather the previous West Ham match. So they did keep a clean sheet versus West Ham, and I think that's very much so deserved. But then actually, if I look even a game back, still gave a lot of chances away to Leicester. So I'm not necessarily thinking that a clean sheet is extremely probable here versus Brentford, who've actually looked really, really promising in the last few games, and two of those games being really, really tough teams like City and Liverpool. So that's kind of where I'm at with my team selection. Let's just jump into my transfer plans, because it does actually involve whether I make some moves this week or not. So we're back here with the Fantasy Football Hub client. We have the My Team pick and rating tool here, which I love to use to actually visualize my transfers going forwards, and just seeing how, generally speaking, right, a model interprets the strength of those transfers, the quality of those transfers, knowing the fixture landscape ahead, and given how things are valued. So what I would say is have a look at the link in the description below if you're interested in having a look at this. I still think that there is a great deal on offer, which is a just 3-month trial for the Fantasy Football Hub set of tools. You can obviously cancel if you don't want to continue going forwards, but it's a good chance to actually have a look at all that is available for you to actually gain rank as a manager and do well, particularly since we of course have the second chance league around, and I'm sure you guys have fun prizes in store for your own mini leagues. But in Gameweek 23, I'm looking at either rolling or actually making some very aggressive transfers. The reason why I'm saying this is because I've optimized the team per the model, and clearly it thinks that I should be playing Chris Wood, and I completely appreciate that most people would play Chris Wood, and you want to call me stupid for playing Odegaard, and I think that's fine. I still think at the end of the day, Odegaard is a penalty taker, set piece taker, playing versus a very, very poor team away from home, which I like, and in most cases I would be playing Odegaard. So I still see myself benching Chris Wood. That's that. Happy to argue, but if I'm okay with benching Chris Wood, let's be honest, I'm probably not playing Chris Wood for the foreseeable. The reason why I say that is because looking at the fixtures, Brighton at home is probably the one nice game, and that's Gameweek 24, where if I replace him with someone who actually plays in a double, I suppose I give myself ample opportunities to match Chris Wood on Gameweek 24, and after that, the fixtures become really, really bad. So my plan, if I am to use free transfers now, is to fast forward the transfers that I suggested last week instead. So by selling Chris Wood and going for Dominic Calvert-Lewin, and yes, I said Dominic Calvert-Lewin, but it could also be Ndiaye, right? I'd say the big trade-off with Calvert-Lewin and Ndiaye, and funnily enough, the model here just doesn't rate Calvert-Lewin at all. So let's just say I use Ndiaye as an example, but if I go Ndiaye now, I just bench Ndiaye, and then I actually go out of Flecken, or not out of Flecken, but actually I go out of Valdemarsson instead to go into Allison. Now, there's two reasons for why I'm doing this, and I'm sure a lot of people who haven't watched the video last week probably won't remember, but the reason why I'll be going for Allison and Flecken is because Game Week 29 still seems to be quite predictably a game where Liverpool will be playing versus probably Newcastle in the final of the Carabao Cup. Tottenham have a 1-0 lead, but they're about to head into Anfield for the second leg, and they're not about to, because this game is about to be played at around Game Week 24. So Tottenham have so many injuries. They're a much weaker team. We know that. If Dominic Solanke, for example, is not even there, or even if you looked at, let's say, the way that market evaluated that fixture and the probability for Tottenham to actually advance, even with the 1-0 aggregate lead, it's very likely that Liverpool still wins and probably wins on average that tie. And so they find themselves within the finals of the Carabao Cup, and therefore they blank in Game Week 29. Now, the blank will be Aston Villa and Liverpool. If Liverpool win, if Tottenham win, it's Tottenham versus Fulham. I'm expecting that Newcastle can hold that 2-0 aggregate lead that they got at the Emirates and should be able to manage fine in securing their spot within the Carabao Cup final. So that probably means Isak and Palace is out, Newcastle and Palace, of course. And so when I look at my team, there's quite a few players that I do need to be progressively selling in the future. I have the option of either going Munoz to Konate or doing this move here, which is basically locking in an Everton forward who just sits on the bench this week. And then actually I play Alisson versus Ipswich at home. Now, I think there's actually a huge fixture gain here for Alisson, because what is the point of going for triple Liverpool if I can't even maximize around triple Liverpool for Game Week 23 when they actually face off versus Ipswich at home? So that's kind of the main reasons why I really want to make a transfer this week. We get the Lille at home match as well in the Champions League to give us a little bit of information on what we think about this Liverpool team and how to approach them. I think Alisson should be fine, so he's one of the safer Liverpool picks. It doesn't necessarily increase my game week rating, but it does actually improve my team for Game Week 24 while still minorly improving my team for this week. So that's kind of where I'm at with the team, and that's where I'd like to play things. I do plan on playing Hall over Munoz. I as I've always said, I think the hub model here is quite aggressive on the home and away matches. I probably am a little bit cooler than that, but I think it makes a lot of sense to play Munoz, and hence also why I said I ultimately do regret the opportunity of, I guess, benching Munoz this week, but it is what it is. This week, though, just going back to the point, if I go for NDI or Calvert-Lewin, it does ruin me in one way, right? If let's say we have some sort of crazy Liverpool injury and suddenly an attacker is nailed, yes, I lose out on that upside in Game Week 24, but who knows? There's so much time between Game Weeks 24 in terms of the first leg and the second leg of Liverpool's double that you never know how that's going to happen. And I'll also just mention that that double is tricky. It's Everton away, it's Bournemouth away. Now, Everton away might not look tricky, but Bournemouth away definitely is. And so that's why I also think that getting that up front value of Alisson is very intriguing for me. And who is to say that by the time that Game Week 24 comes around, if I roll my free transfer for this week in Game Week 23, that I suddenly won't be making the exact same move anyways. Now, if I plan to go with NDI or Calvert-Lewin, I think that's a question of, do I really believe that Calvert-Lewin can score, maybe let's say, score or assist, I suppose, within the span of 2 to 3 game weeks, right? Because it's taken quite a while for him to score a goal versus Tottenham, and it is Tottenham, whereas they do play versus Leicester at home, which is a good match, and then, of course, Liverpool, you're not really expecting for much there from Dominic Calvert-Lewin, but he does take penalties for the team, and Ndiaye is the deputy. Now, the big question is going to be, what are Everton going to do in the transfer market? Are they going to get rid of players like Broja? Are they going to get another striker within the game? And are they going to get maybe another attacking player, maybe a winger instead? So if we get more information, that might tell us whether Dominic Calvert-Lewin in the future is a bad transfer. NDI is probably the safe transfer because I don't think his minutes are going to be impacted, and he's the safer play. Whereas Calvert-Lewin could very much still, I suppose, in some world be sold in this window because his contract is running out and Everton might want to make a buck on him and he might want to leave anyways, which I don't really think is super likely. So the way I see it, I think Calvert-Lewin probably stays. So I think Calvert-Lewin is therefore the better pick on paper. And this becomes a little bit of a dead spot going forwards within my team where I don't play this Everton forward and I just continue to play basically week on week on week with a 7-man attack. And then I progressively find a couple free transfers to allow myself to move off of either DC or NDI in a few weeks' time. And that's kind of the plan that I have because Rodgers is playable for the next 3 matches. So that means I don't really have to touch him. When I'm looking at Odegaard now, I think even though he's been absolutely stinking up still, Mbeumo was the transfer that I really wanted to do in Game Week 24. So if I fast forward to Game Week 24 now, if I make the true transfers that I make, I think either I go out of Gabriel here versus Man City because I don't appreciate the matchup very much. I definitely do play NDIS, so if I optimize my team, the person who's on my bench is going to be Rodgers, who I think, functionally, I would still like to play. Maybe I play him over, let's say, João Pedro, because João Pedro actually has a really tough match. But yeah, I probably play Hull versus Fulham. And actually, my other defenders don't have great matches. So it's a case of, do I, let's say, see an opportunity to bench Gabriel, because I still think he's got really good fixtures after this anyways, and I don't really care. And then I go out of, let's say, Munoz or Castagna into another Everton defender to maximize the Game Week 24. Or I ignore Everton, as I previously mentioned, and then I make a move like Odegaard to Mbumo. That's kind of what I'm deciding between now, but I feel like I have the flexibility still, despite making transfers in Game Week 23, to do this. So that's why Game Week 24 is an interesting window where, you know, we have one more week effectively under Moyes to basically get a little bit of a feel for, you know, how much are we really shooting for here with being able to bank on an Everton double and a Leicester at home fixture. More importantly, do I go for Mykolenko and actually double up on Everton, or do I actually just simply keep NDI within the team and treat my team as if the double didn't exist for Everton, and then move on with my life by making a transfer like Odegaard to Mbumo? So that's something I've been thinking about. On 25, I probably actually roll once again, because whatever move I make on, let's say, Game Week 25, if I was to lock in the moves that I said that I would, I'd probably just do nothing on Game Week 25, because the team still looks really, really strong. I'll continue benching NDI. I clearly won't have Chris Wood in this iteration. So that's kind of what I'm thinking, right? If I just, for example, have Odegaard for Leicester away, this is still a very, very strong team at the end of the day. And it's really only on Game Week 26 where I think this is a week crucially where we're thinking about going for more Bournemouth midfielders. And Game Week 26 is the week where we go for players like Kluivert, etc., etc. You can't see NDI and some of the other players here because the sort of my team pick and rating has sort of expired and sort of has reloaded because I haven't locked in my moves. But that's kind of the rough plan. I think Game Week 26 is the window where you then start to, as a Rodgers owner, consider whether you want to sell Rodgers, because actually the run of games for Rodgers is a little bit mediocre. As you can see, they're all red anyways on the client, and I think this is a great time to just simply move into Semenyo, Kluivert, or Dango. I really don't actually have any opinions on Semenyo, Kluivert, and Dango, because the main thing that has made Kluivert and Dango better recently is just simply the sheer amount of injuries that have impacted the team. It's allowed Dango to play up front. It's also allowed Kluivert to play 90 minutes of football, whereas previously we were seeing Kluivert as more of a 70 to 75 minute substitute, and we even saw him bench versus Chelsea, which already tells you what the manager thinks about Kluivert's level of fitness, I guess, in terms of the demands versus their need to constantly press as a team. So it seems like, you know, he's dealing with the injuries as it is. You can't be benching Kluivert basically to play, unfortunately, some of the players who probably don't deserve to be playing at this moment in time at this level in the Premier League. So that's where I feel like Game Week 26 is a very interesting window to think about these Bournemouth mids. But that's kind of my initial thoughts. If I go back to Game Week 23, if I roll, I think the beauty of rolling is that it does give me 3 free transfers, and it gives me the maximum amount of flexibility to make all the moves that I really want here on Game Week 24, where, you know, I can definitely choose to go to Konate if I want, to Virgil if I want, to maybe even some forwards, because with 3 free transfers, I have the ability to move my team around exactly or whatever way I want. I even have the ability to make some midfield transfers as well if, let's say, Luis Diaz becomes super tempting. But I think it's more likely that if I really go for a third Liverpool player, probably right now, based on the injuries that we know, I mean, Jota being quite precarious and Luis Diaz not playing particularly well, that maybe Nunez or Gakpo become the interesting players of choice for Liverpool. So those are where my thoughts are. Part of the reason, as I said, where I want to go for Alisson is just to be able to enjoy Ipswich at home and to get value from that fixture and to move on into a double and also confirm that sort of value. And I think going for a player like Konate, who's quite injury prone, which is not great, but, you know, injury proneness aside, should give you those fixtures. Same with Alisson. And that's basically where my thoughts lie. Let me know what your thoughts are. I know some people are very intrigued in going for Gakpo. The reason why I don't love Gakpo is because I do think that he takes a lot more money from your team than an Everton forward does. And if you go for Gakpo, that spot probably needs to stay on Gakpo post 24, or post 24, you just sell Gakpo, right? So that's the main reason why I'm a little bit against the idea of going for Gakpo, because it does book future transfers. Now, by going for Alisson, the beauty of that transfer always is that I keep Alisson and Flecken, and even if Liverpool blank on Game Week 29, I don't have to touch my team in whatsoever way, because I can just manage to keep Alisson all that time, and I don't have to use another future free transfer in getting out a third Liverpool player who, honestly, without a double, we'd probably never actually want to own. I think a triple up with Liverpool right now. Maybe actually people still would prefer, let's say, a Virgil over an Arsenal defender. Depends on really how you evaluate both those defenses. But certainly, I think recently we've had no interest whatsoever in being invested into the attacker bag, because there's just a lot of depth within that team. And Part of that is, I guess, Case and Elliott as well. They could also feature later down the line, not necessarily for the attacking players that we're talking about, but just in general within, for example, midfield spaces, potentially just to see out games in different game states where you have Kesa playing, and he's a little bit more flexible in terms of positions that he can play. So those are where my thoughts lie in terms of my transfer plans. It comes down to, do I play aggressive, as I always do with my free transfers, or do I roll and for the first time this season touch 3 free transfers? I'm not really sure, but I hope you guys have a wonderful week ahead, and good luck to all of you who have Palmer captained if you were brave and braver than me.